everyone. Again, my name is Gina Bocanegra, and I am the Executive Director with Justice for Families, a national organization run by parent leaders and impacted by parent leaders across the country. And, we have an amazing group of panelists, and I'm also going to say amazing women taking the lead. And Justice for Families is a national organization that has two main goals. Our two main goals are to transform the juvenile justice system so that it is driven by the interests of young people and families, and move away those resources back into the communities that are mostly impacted. And as we see today, much of the work that we've been doing for years, we have over 50 years of experience doing family work. And what's amazing right now, even though when the discussion we're gonna have today is, system and community partnership, and what does that look like, especially during these times, the COVID-19 times. Though thinking of COVID-19 and how it turned everyone's world upside down, whether here in the United States or across the world, in another country, COVID-19 brought a lot of awareness to much of the social justice issues that we've been talking about for generations. And one of the biggest concerns that we've had has always been juvenile justice and how we engage families, and how do we keep kids out of the system, and how do we lower the numbers of the disproportionate amount of young people of color in the system. And many of the conversations and changing policies were, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, and never thought of getting creative and creating something new for young people and families to keep them out the system. And the discussion is going to be exactly how we all, systems and families, had to get creative to keep our families safe and healthy at home and in the community. So how do we create those partnership? Engagement, we are beyond engaging. We want to partner to make sure that those numbers that are lowering because of the COVID and kids need to be home where they can be taken care of and be safe, but also being mindful about these are still young people with the brain development, that adolescent behavior is not going to change because of COVID. They still are risk takers. So how do we get creative systems and community to make sure that families have all the tools that they need to keep their kids home safe? And what are the things that probation is doing? Thank you, Kate. What probation is doing currently, getting creative also, because we don't want to send kids back. We're putting them in traumatic environments. So how do we get creative and also invest? Because we can't allow the community to do the work without the proper resources and the investment. So I'm going to pass it over to the amazing Sue. I love her definition, our definition of family engagement. It's not the traditional, the way we thought family should look. So Sue, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. And, everyone, I'm excited to be here with this prestigious group of women leaders for this webinar this afternoon. And Tracy and Kate are our panelists. When you get your first question, which we'll come to in just a minute, if you could take a moment at the beginning of your question just to also introduce yourself to our audience today. So my name is Sue Badeau. I work with Jeanette with Justice for Families. I have family members currently incarcerated, 2 sons, and I've had other family members as well, both in the youth justice and adult justice systems over time. So it's a personal and passionate topic for me. I've been in these trenches for 40 plus years, from when our first son was arrested over 40 years ago. And so I I've seen how engagement has been done, how it's been done well, how it's been ignored, how it's happened in an urban area, a rural area. I've had a lot of these life experiences, as well as getting to be part of this incredible network with Jeanette, where we hear and listen to and absorb those stories and the experiences from families all over the country and in every kind of circumstance. And that's what we draw upon to try to bring to you. So I've been asked to just sort of set the table for our conversation this afternoon by giving you how we as Justice for Families, when we talk about what is family engagement and why is it important anyway. So the first thing we want you to know about the what is that every piece of what I'm going to talk about next, the key word in front of it needs to be meaningful. So whether you're having just a simple transactional interaction with a family where you're gathering information, you're getting their address, you're getting their medical history, you're setting up the time for the next visit, any of those transactional interactions still need to be meaningful. They still need to be respectful. They still need to honor that I know the name of this person, or I'm going to ask their name. I'm going to ask how they want to be called. So even in the most simple transactional interactions, we want that level of meaning and purposefulness, intention, and respect. And what we see when we talk about what is family engagement, we think of it in two different ways. We think one, and both ways we call it continuum. So one kind of a continuum is the continuum for those doing the engagement, for system people, for probation officers, and everyone involved with probation. And that continuum is, okay, we have interactions, what I just talked about. We have interactions that can be transactional, that are necessary. Those interactions set the tone so often for if we're going to ever have any meaningful engagement. So those interactions are crucial and need to be done, like I said, respectfully and well, but we can never confuse interaction is not engagement. Interaction is an important part of our overall process and needs to be done well, but it is not the same as engagement. That's transactional, communication. Important, but not engagement. So then the next part of the continuum is actual engagement. When we have meaningful, reciprocal, respectful, informed participatory relationship building between the system person, the probation officer, whoever else in the system is part of this family's life, and the young person and their family members as they choose and define them. So that's engagement. And then we move, where our goal is to move beyond engagement, and Jeanette hinted at this in her comments, to partnership, where systems actually rely on families to help lead, to help promote any growth or change opportunities that are needed, policy reforms that are needed, budget decisions that are needed, co-facilitating training for staff. All of those things fall into a category of partnership. There's many pyramids and other things about family engagement you can look at that have lots of other layers to them. But we like to just think of it in these three simple ways. There's interaction, there's meaningful engagement, and then there's partnership at that next higher level. The other way we like to think about it is from the family's perspective. That was from the system perspective. From the family's perspective, we want to have those layers or those levels of participation in the relationship that involves our family member. But another continuum we talk about with families is we help families. How do you have engagement? How are you fully engaged? How can you be engaged in a meaningful way in your own child's case, your own son or daughter, grandchild, niece or nephew? In the case that is part of your family, how can you be fully engaged in that case? Then we want to see some families can go a step beyond that. Not every family is going to want to, but for those who do, how can I really be engaged in the life of the agency? Is there an advisory board I can be part of? Can they invite me to be a peer mentor for other families in the agency? Will they invite me to review a new brochure they're designing before they actually produce it, and to see if it's family friendly? That's me and my agency, my directly working together. So that's another level of family engagement. And then a third level is outside of the agency, can I as a family be involved in a bigger way in system reform? Can I be an advocate? Can I be a voice on the outside that's working with legislators or city council members or school boards or Congress, whoever it might be, to really take it to that next level? So we think of family engagement in those ways, the continuum of interaction, engagement, partnership, and the continuum of my case, my agency, the big community and system level. And so those are kind of the what, and that we were really looking for those meaningful, respectful things that get us to that. And then finally the why, and then I'm gonna stop my talking so you can hear from our panelists. But we wanna highlight, research has shown across multiple systems, and we're getting more of the research in the justice system. That was one that didn't quite have some of this research early on when other systems were doing this. But when families are engaged in these meaningful ways that I just described, we get a bunch of really good outcomes. First of all, it improves the outcomes for the specific youth in the system. They get better outcomes, health, education, all the areas that we might be looking at. And secondly, it reduces the use of more restrictive settings for those youth. So if they're already involved with probation, it reduces the likelihood that they'll have to go into detention and so on. It reduces the movement into higher levels of increased restrictive settings. So those are two really great values or reasons for the youth perspective. From the family perspective, surveys of families consistently show that families are more satisfied and therefore more likely to do what the system might call cooperate. Families are more satisfied with the services they're receiving when they are engaged in meaningful ways. And then what we see, because of all those things, we see increased community safety. So if we're about community safety, engaging families is one of the ways that we actually increase community safety. But the real cherry on top from a systems perspective should be this, that when there's good quality, meaningful, intentional family engagement, not only do we get better outcomes for the children, the youth, the families, and the community, we get better outcomes for the system and the staff. We find that systems that have good family engagement have an improved climate within their system, an improved climate and culture for the workforce. Therefore, workers have greater job satisfaction and less staff turnover. So it's win all the way around. And that's why it's so important. So on that note, just laying that as our foundation of how we're thinking about family engagement and why it's so important, we're gonna start listening to our panelists and their thoughts on things. And I'm gonna start with you, Kate. So I'm gonna read you, share with you a question, and then as I do, again, if you would start by introducing yourself and then go ahead and answer the question. But the question for you, Kate, is why and how can probation officers operate with family engagement as the norm, especially during times like this, like the COVID-19 crisis or any other time when there's like a big overarching crisis? How can probation officers make sure that family engagement is the norm?
Thank you, Sue. I'm Kate Pearson. I'm a field probation officer at the Pierce County Juvenile Court. I've been here for approaching 7 years and supervised a couple of different specialty caseloads as well as being in the field. I'm nodding along to most of everything that Sue just said because I think that in our family engagement process here at the county, we have seen those outcomes. So we sort of were inadvertently preparing for COVID and not even realizing that we were doing it. I think better part of a year ago, we launched field-wide a caregiver meeting, which is something that occurs led by probation and held with the caregivers of youth that we are supervising. And that's identified by the family. So usually it's who the child is living with. But we were very careful to say caregiver versus parents because sometimes our youth live with different people and we want to be mindful of different family structures and dynamics. So the caregiver meeting was developed to include caregivers into the probation process. What we realized when we were developing an opportunity-based probation model is that sometimes our role as officers with parents could be a bit adversary. Our goals weren't aligned, our approaches weren't aligned, and it was having an adverse effect on our relationship with parents, parents' relationships with us, in conjunction, how we were working with the youth. And so we really needed something that could create a partnership versus as a PO, I'm going to come in and tell you what to do, because that's not ever what we want. We want to empower the caregiver and not take that power away. So what we'll do is we'll meet with the caregivers alone, preferably without the youth, and we will talk about their experience with the youth at that point, the good, the bad, the ugly. Our goal is to allow space for them to inform us on their child, to tell us what their struggles have been, what they identify as their strengths, what they really want for their youth, what their goals are, and then we'll flush out some tangible things that we can support the caregiver achieving with the youth in that way. We call them action steps. Other people call them goals. But the whole purpose is to allow the caregiver to vent, to educate us, and then us both walk away with an idea of what the goal is that the caregiver would like to see. And then we sort of present that back to the youth of, hey, me and Auntie talked, and what's really important to Auntie is that you are a contributing member to the family. And what that means for her is that when she comes home late and she's been working all day, she would really love it if the dishwasher's loaded. Can you please help her out with that? And just those simple conversations, facilitating those, ends up cutting down so much of just the little arguments that escalate into something much bigger. It can then escalate into potentially the police getting called because there's some kind of DV incident or something. We have seen a tremendous decrease in overall sort of crisis kind of phone calls that come in for situations like that after we have a caregiver meeting. So we find them to be extremely beneficial. The other thing is, particularly with COVID, when COVID first started and we were having conversations with families, it really wasn't about probation. It was just simply like, how are you? How are you hanging in there? What do you need? Do you want to check in and just vent? Are your kids driving you crazy? My kids are driving me crazy, and little things like that. Like, we really just were checking in human to human rather than PO to parent or PO to client. And then after we all kind of got in the swing of it, we came back and started really like, how can we progress forward now that we're all in it? But really it was just human to human contact.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a really informative and comprehensive reply. And so I'm going to turn it to Jeanette to give the next question to Tracy, and then we'll also take a couple.
Before we get on the next question, Kate, you gave so many tips on when I think about letting a young teenager, can you contribute to doing the dishes? And how do we de-escalate altercation at home because of dishes? Yes. When we know no one likes to do the dishes, whether you have a dishwasher or your hands are the dishwashers. But right. With teenagers, part of the discussion is how do we negotiate and incentivize some of the things we want our young people to do. Mm-hmm. So parents also have to learn some of those tips and techniques. Yes. So the next question is also for you, Kate. Many jurisdictions don't have the option of detention right now, or violating a kid because he broke curfew. Even though there's COVID and there's social distancing, many young people it's not clear to them. Right. So how do you respond? Your department, how have they responded to these technical violations? And how your department has gotten creative, because we don't want them back. Right. The numbers have decreased in detention and even arrests. Mm-hmm. So we know it can happen. It took a crisis to ring that bell. Mm-hmm. So share with us, what are some of the challenges and how would you able to get a little creative? So
really, because of, it all comes back to the caregiver meeting, because we have a clear plan established with the caregiver in the beginning. What I didn't mention before as part of the conversation is us sort of flushing out roles. Like, you are the one in charge at home. My position is to partner with you. And so together we'll figure out, I guess, a response plan in preparation for when things go wrong. So if kiddo is home late for curfew, you know, it might not be, you don't need to call me right away. How do you want to handle that, mom and dad? Do you want to take community time away the next day? Do you want to assign them some extra work chores? Do you know, how do you want to do that? Okay, you do that. And then if they're still not doing what you want them to do, then you can start to involve me and we'll have conversations together. So some of those technical violations there's already a plan of action on how to manage them before COVID happened. So it was just something that we fell back on is, so what did we establish in the caregiver meeting? So the partnership is really key. And then kind of falling back on, the caregiver knows the kiddo the best. You know, they know essentially what could be the most impactful. So we follow their lead. When we get into higher levels of violations or something where probation really does need to have a response, we'll brainstorm with them. Because of COVID, our youth weren't able to do our work crew. We weren't able to access community service in the community. And so we partnered with our parents to say, what kind of projects can they do around the house? You know, a couple of kids, they live on large pieces of land. So they were able to do some landscaping type work at their home, supervised by their parents. But that's sort of how they were able to follow through with their consequence for a behavior that probation and mom and dad didn't want to see. So it ended up being a deeper sense of the partnership and us collaborating on how we were going to manage those things. Sometimes we would ask the kids call in more frequently to have more intentional conversation if we could kind of see the writing on the wall, if things are starting to get a little bit sticky, so that we could flesh out different decision points and encourage them to use skills that they've learned up into this point, or teach them skills over the phone. We've been able to access our kids through like Zoom and Teams, so we can still have meaningful conversations with them, even from a distance.
Those are really great examples. Thank you, Kate. And I think we're going to circle back to some of the things you said. So, you know, we want to just make sure we get some of the other topics in here with Tracy, but some of the questions that are coming up on the chat will kind of circle us back to things you've mentioned. I especially appreciate when you noted that you want to ask people, what do you need and how can I support you? Rather than just coming in with a preconceived idea of, this is what we do, here's the probation checklist. You know, and even sometimes when there's individual meetings like that, like even in schools when they have IEPs or whatever, it's supposed to be that kind of relational give and take that you just described, but often it sort of morphs into this checklist and, oh, they just want the family to sign off. So I think the way you described your use of the meeting is just as important as the idea of having it. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm gonna turn us to Tracy now. And Tracy, I'm gonna ask you the next question that you know that we were planning on. And then after that, before I toss it back to Jeanette, I'm gonna put in one of the questions that came up on the chat and give both Tracy and Kate a chance to reply to it. But first, Tracy, as you've heard these different kinds of innovations and ideas that Kate has been talking about and the underlying issues in the way that Jeanette worded the questions, what do you think can be done from a community-based organization perspective to help support this change, both in sort of philosophy and attitude and also in practical, concrete practices? How can community organizations be part of that? And please introduce yourself first. Oh, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself, Tracy? Technical people, we need some help. Okay. So we're going to make sure Tracy gets unmuted, and hopefully our technical team that's on in the background here can help make sure she gets unmuted. In the meantime, I just wanted to highlight that some of the questions, and I am going to give both Kate and Tracy a chance to answer this question when we get Tracy back online here. But one of the questions that kind of was asked in two different ways by both Nikki and Jasmine was, what about families who seem like they either are skeptical of the system, wanting to engage in a meaningful way, or actually don't want, or voice that I don't want anything to do with you. I'm tired of the system. I don't want to be part of this idea of building a relationship. And so that's something that's really been very important to us at Justice for Families, because as family members ourselves, we know that families want to be involved in their child and engaged in what matters and what makes a difference to their child. The problem is that there's been distrust in systems. And so we have to bridge that trust gap. And so I'm going to give, again, both Tracy and Kate a chance to reply to that in a few minutes. But one of the things that we definitely believe is important about that at Justice for Families is that peer-to-peer, family-to-family, whether it's peer-to-peer mentorship, whether it's family support, whether it's the work Jeanette just does on the phone. It's always making sure that we have this opportunity to have a family hear from another family and be someone that can speak to their fears, to their heart, to their concerns, to their strengths, and help them see and understand why they will be valued, how they will be valued, why their role is important, why they're needed. So I think that's one of the key things that we would talk about. And I think it looks like we might have audio for Tracy now. So
yes, I had an iPad, so I was able to just turn my computer off.
Okay, great. Well, we have Tracy now, so we're going to ask you to introduce yourself and answer the original question I asked you about community organizations. And then you can roll into that question about how to help engage families that seem to be, perceived to be reluctant to be involved. And so you can reply to both of those, then we'll have Kate and Jeanette have a chance at that as well.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Perryman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Center of Hope Family Services, which is a nonprofit in Toledo, Ohio. I am also the relative of many returning citizens. I have stopped identifying them because in my choice, I found that it's better they're not here to speak for themselves, and I identify them if they choose to be identified. And sometimes there are some in my family that want to keep that information private. So I have direct family members and some indirect family members who have been through the system. So in dealing with it personally, for the first time in 1998, so it's coming up on 22 years, I do know what it's like to have to interface with the criminal justice system, feeling embarrassed and all alone, feeling judged, and trying to navigate and figure out how to address all of the other systems that may come into play, whether it be mental health, whether it be housing, and what that looks like, and trying to figure all that out all alone. And so when the opportunity came to bring a family navigator program to Toledo, it was kind of cathartic because I could say that maybe this is why we went through all of that. So it was 18 years later, here was the answer, and being able to walk families through the system to help them feel like they're not judged. Also, to sometimes the way the system treats families is like they're the defendant themselves. And to understand that family members or caregivers are not necessarily the ones who have gotten in any trouble, even though that's how they're often treated. And giving them a safe space to talk so we can really come together and problem solve about and distill out what is the system's problem, where do we see bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious? Where do we see oppression? And then where is it that we as a community and as families or as individuals have some work to do ourselves? So that's what we've been doing in Lucas County for the last 4 years, going on 5 years. And so in terms of engaging families, what I will say is that regardless of COVID-19 or any crisis, typically the community is there with the families, whether they're in direct contact with the juvenile justice system or not. And we are the ones that are there with the families as they're trying to navigate a lot of the systems that feed into the juvenile justice system at some point, whether it's education, whether it's child welfare, whether it's just being a part of a neighborhood that's under-resourced and you are targeted and profiled for no reason at all. So I would say that's our strength, is that the families are typically going to us when they feel that there is no one else that they can reach out to and talk to. And that hasn't changed as a result of COVID-19. I would say that it's become even more exacerbated because you have all of these other stressors. You have people who are, back when we had the food scares and people were running to the grocery stores and they're buying everything off the shelf. And a lot of our families didn't even have transportation, or they live in food deserts to begin with. Having family members who now have children in the home who usually are at school all day, and trying to figure out who is going to watch and supervise them and who's going to feed them. So what we did as an agency is started figuring out what other home, family, individual matters or indicators of wellness would be compromised as a result of COVID. So we were able to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture food box program. And every week, we distribute 12 to 15,000 pounds of fresh produce, dairy, and meat to our families. Number one, that's one thing we've done. We started providing educational support. We went and bought laptops and notebooks so that kids continue their education at home with professionals who are able to support them in the homework, so that that does not bring another stressor and exacerbate another level of, or sense of inadequacy on the part of parents who are already overstressed with maybe a child that's already in the system. We would send just toys and different things for the younger kids in the house to play with. And when necessary, we delivered food baskets to the house, because transportation sometimes was an issue. And that was a way to reinforce safety. Before COVID, we had very strong networks with our families in terms of the phone, because even still, being down in juvenile court, every time there's an issue, to have to try to find a way to get down there to see us wasn't practical before COVID. So our phones were already ringing off the hook, and they've continued to do so. I think the biggest thing that would help us help the system is to start to move to a paradigm where community-based organizations are not called in at the last minute or as a source of reaction. After the system has absolved everything it knows how to do, and oftentimes has used all its resources, then call or punt the ball to the community and say, hey, we're going to return these children back to you, these families, and you sort it out. So I think being a part of the conversation earlier in the case is always something that helps us help the child, help the family better. And it takes a lot of the stigma away. Because even when we are empathic providers, you're still in the families don't forget that they're still in a justice facility, and they're still working with justice staff, no matter how compassionate it may seem. So continuing to look for ways to be destigmatized and use the community sooner rather than later, and for us to be involved early on the continuum would help us continue to help the kids and their families.
Tracy, you're such an amazing. I'm a fan of yours, and you know I
yours too.
Work, and you said a few things that really touch the stigma. It's embarrassing for us to say, I have a child or a loved one in the system. It's been embedded in us for many, many years, generations. We've lost that. For some of us, we think it's just normal and it's just the way it is. But we know that it's not fair, it's inhumane. the things that are happening to our loved ones. And then when they return back to the community, which is something you said, they come back with so much trauma, and anything can trigger them, and we're supposed
Yes.
to embrace and fix it. It's difficult. It also takes a village to raise children, and it's
Yes.
about building community support, and investing in the community. You know, I tell folks, and sometimes, you know, I think I need to articulate things a little differently. We can't continue poverty pimping communities. We
Amen.
need to invest in communities, and we can't think about, I can't wait to go back to the new normal. That normal did not work.
No, it did not.
And it's about creating, and the way Kate and Tracy, you are getting creative and innovative, and bringing new ideas, new ways of partnership, and also developing trust. We talk about, you know, there's a few questions there about trust. Families don't trust the system, and the system don't trust the families. So we have to learn to communicate, because as Sue shared, when a young person in our caseload is doing well, the family's okay, the community's doing better, and Kate, as staff members and system folks, we go home feeling much better. I'm looking at your background, and you had to get creative in teaching. I'm not sure if you have a third grade or a fourth grader at home. Your background looks like a school. So as a parent, you had to get creative, because now school's at home, and mom has to juggle work and family life. And we also learned that not only the working parent was an absent parent.
Right.
Absent parents are not only the ones that are away from their children. We as working parents can become absent. So what are some of the things that you, Probation, and Tracy, in the community, innovative ways that emerged because of the pandemic, the crisis, that you hope we can continue, and it's embedded in a new normal practice?
And before you reply to that, I want to build on that trust theme. And Kate, the question Jeanette just asked, going to you first, and then we'll come back to Tracy. But as you answer that, if you could also weigh in on, because several people have asked, you know, what do we do about families who just don't want to be engaged? That's the way the question is being worded, or don't trust the agency, or are exhausted, tired of the system, don't want to be part of it, or just feel like giving up. Some of this language that is a very real sensation that a person working can feel. And at the same time, the family can feel very differently. That's, you know, that's how they're being perceived. Doesn't mean that's really where they're at. I remember a few years later getting a chance to look at the case file for my son that had been in a youth detention facility that was 6 hours travel time away from our family, and that only had visits on very rare, you know, very limited time frame. And so we weren't always able to participate in them because we had other children, other responsibilities. Yet it was written in the file that we didn't want to be engaged, that we had given up, that we didn't care. So as I'm seeing these questions, I think there has to be this understanding of how is that gap bridged? That's one of the things we spend a lot of time on. But as you answer this question, Kate, I'd especially like you to talk about how do you help bridge that gap where it might seem like a family is disengaged or doesn't want to be engaged. We know differently, but how do we get to that next step in the relationship?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a challenge, because we're all strangers meeting, and we're meeting under some really difficult circumstances. My colleague often says, you know, we're meeting people on the worst day of their lives. And, you know, I'm coming in as Kate, bebopping in like, hey, this is my day, how you doing? And they're like, this is a terrible day, why are you so happy? You know, so I think that we acknowledge it. Whenever we're talking with caregivers, and there might be, I don't even want to call it resistance, because I don't think it's resistance, because it's not that they're not wanting to have this conversation, it's that they are guarded. There is some mistrust. They've been burned before in other agencies and other systems. systems are complicated and big, and when I've had to navigate them on my own, I get frustrated. So I think we go slow. We sort of mirror their pace. If I'm doing an intake with the family and they have 20 questions about what to expect, I will take the time, and a lot of my colleagues do the same thing, to answer the questions, because at the end of the day, if they walk away feeling like, okay, I know what to expect, then that means that we can move forward. If they walk away feeling like they can't ask me a basic, what time do I need to be at court? What should I wear? That's not going to be a good start to our relationship. And then if I'm getting a case and I can see that there's a lot of history, sometimes I'll just very gently say, like, you guys have been through a lot, and I'm coming in, you know, you're at Z and I'm coming in at P, and you guys are spent and you guys are done, and I get that, and it's not my intention to tell you what to do. I want to know how I can help you, and just keep coming back to the human to human. Are you okay? What can I do? Sometimes it just doesn't need to be about probation. Sometimes it just needs to be about you as a person. Are you doing okay? And then everything else will eventually fall into place. So it takes time. Sometimes if we're doing a caregiver meeting or conversation, you have to have multiple of those, right? It doesn't all just, not everyone lives in hearts and flowers. It has to come when it comes, and we have to be patient and let the family, let the youth, let the caregiver decide that we can be trustworthy, and we have to show them how we can be trustworthy. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that was great. Tracy, do you have anything to add to that before we bring another question into the mix?
I think for us, other than, you know, the natural order of rapport is being courteous and kind, empathic, and understanding of people in general, and having a range of multicultural communication skills, and understanding how children of color and adults of color communicate. Just like, for example, African American community, we often will look you directly in the eye when we're talking to you, but not necessarily when we're listening to you. And so just that simple way of communicating can build up, or it can contribute to certain assumptions. So just understanding that can break down walls. But I would say, in addition to that, is doing what you say you're going to do and following through. And we are big on don't make a promise that you can't keep. Don't lose people's paperwork. If you say that you're going to do X by a certain time, you better do it, because those are the things that matter to families. Do you come through? Do you show up on time? If we say we're going to court at 9:30 and I'm nervous before I go up there, are you going to be there at 9:15 to meet me? Those simple things make all the difference in the world many times, because the families already know that we're not miracle workers. They just want to see if we are in tune as to what power we actually have in the relationship and how we can empower them. A lot of times they're testing to see if we're really in tune to who we are, or if we're just playing a role. So that is really, really big in terms of trust. And then also being there for the long haul. So for example, with the COVID-19, it's shrunk our local budgets. And so, you know, we were told that there is no funding for Family Navigator past June 30th. So what did we do? So, I mean, in the meantime, we were able to look at our budget and see where we could find the funds to keep and sustain it going, you know, in the short term, and just see where the chips fall. Well, that means all the world to the families when they see you standing up and making sacrifices and making provisions, and that you're not there just because of a grant. When you bring your resources to the table, that matters. When you do things for them that they don't have to do. For example, when we finance graduation parties for kids that were incarcerated, graduated from high school, and Center of Hope shows up and provides the meal, and, you know, provides a lot of the bulk of the entertainment for Christmas. When Center of Hope shows up with Christmas gifts and food and entertainment and music, when they see us put up something instead of not always taking, it makes all the matter, and it makes all the difference in the world.
You know, Tracy, that's why I love you so much, because it doesn't just take a small grant to support a family.
Right.
To give them all the support, whether it's the emotional, the social, to meet the educational needs. The COVID-19 just really exposed all the social injustice issues that we are facing. So
Right.
there is too much money invested in law enforcement, the
Right.
school to prison pipeline. There's so much that money's going in the wrong direction, where if you invest that money in the community to provide those graduations, young people want to be celebrated. And because of that, we have to celebrate our young people today. They're making a statement in the world today that
Right.
they not put, you know, some need some more training and advocacy on peaceful advocacy and peaceful rallies, but they are strong and resilient and don't want to put up with more of the abuse and the injustice that we've been experiencing for generations.
Absolutely, and I'm so thankful to them. And the majority of, and when we look at the protests, the majority of them are peaceful. You know, the media has a way of just focusing on those. I mean, and you know, there's going to always be abuses. You know, if they're, if the police are so focused on keeping the protesters at bay, then of course someone's going to look and see it as an opportunity to, you know, loot or whatever it's done. That just happens. But that should not take away from all the peaceful protests that are being led by young people. And now it's our job to help them channel that into longer term advocacy, because they have opened up the door, and I want to keep it open so they can walk through it. And
they kicked the door open.
They sure kicked it open. And now they need to be represented in greater levels. And we need to invest in them, like you said, the resilience to be able to do that. So now how do we educate them for further advocacy? How do we train them to run for office? How do we train them to go back to their communities and be mentors and all of that sort of thing? And the resources, like, you know, Janelle, already there. In New York City, when I spoke at the Credible Messengers Conference, to see what those kids are doing around singing and dancing and photography and all of that. They have the talent and they're willing to utilize it. They just need the space and the outlet to do so.
Wait till you come back to New York so you could visit our Families United Justice for Families healing space.
Right.
All right.
So we have to get creative. So both Kate and Tracy, what innovations emerged from the pandemic crisis that you're hopeful will become embedded as a normal?
And as you think about answering that, just responding to some of what I've seen on the chat as well, is as you think about embedding these innovative ideas as the normal, and Tracy touched on it about the funding issue, you know, what are your thoughts about how you will in your own system or community be able to sustain these innovative approaches or these new ways of kind of doing things that we're learning from this moment, this special moment of the pandemic? So not only what are you doing, but how do you envision sustaining it? So if you could each reply to that, that may take us close to the end, but that's a big substantive question we want to get to right now. Why don't we start with you, Kate?
Well, so we moved to telephonic hearings and pretrial conferences. So pretrial conferences here are the meetings that the youth participate in with their attorneys to talk about their case and to figure out if they're going to take a plea or something else. And historically, they've had to come to the detention center, the courthouse, to meet with their attorney face to face. And so what that would be is they would have to arrive at 1 p.m. and then they just wait. It's like going to the DMV. Your name gets called. You can wait a number of hours. It's very frustrating for kids and families. Parents have to take time off work. We've all wanted that system to change for a very long time. And COVID really pushed us into that because now we have permission from the court to do telephonic pretrial conferencing. So families that are used to have to travel in 40 minutes to sit here and talk to their attorney for 20 minutes, now they can call in. So it's really, I know we were like, praise, and then same calling in for hearings. There are certain hearings that youth can participate in over the phone. I asked our data guy, our JDI coordinator, to pull up the data if he had it, and I was blown away by the decrease in failure to appear warrants that we have had this year compared to last year at the same time. So last year we had 115 failure to appear warrants between March and May. This year we have had 23. 23. And I think there's a lot that probably goes into that we don't have time to unpack, but it's my belief that a lot of that has to do with they can appear over the phone, and then you don't have all those hardships getting in the way, and then they get their business done and they're out, you know? So that is something that we all here really want to push forward and keep. The other thing is that we've been able to virtualize some of our positive youth development programming, which again is helping us to reach youth that are further away where transportation is a barrier. So our boat builders program, they made all these really amazing take-home kits that we could deliver to the home, and we could do that safely. And then they have written instructions, or you can log on to a YouTube account and meet with your mentor and put everything together. And the kits are really cool. There was a razor scooter that they made, a drum, stilts. I mean, so all of that stuff, it's just sort of expanding the youth and families that we're able to reach. And we've been talking about it for a long time, but COVID really pushed us into action. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise in that way. So those are probably the two things that I think we could take away from this and keep internally, and not even have to rely on outside folks tremendously to help us make that happen.
Oh, that's amazing, Kate. Oh.
Yeah, love that. And anytime we have anything to do with arts and creativity, you know, I do a lot of teaching around trauma and healing from trauma, and we do a lot of that with Injustice for Families, and so that it has multiple benefits. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And Tracy, if you could reply, yes, we believe in it. Thank you, Jeanette. So Tracy, if you could just go ahead and say a little bit, you've identified some of the innovative things, but specifically the sustainability piece, if you could add to that as well.
So Toledo is one of the communities that was selected by James Bell to explore structural racism in juvenile justice and in governmental planning. And so out of that work, he shared with us that probably about 90% of funds invested in government go to staffing and sustaining the administrative functions, and like 10% or less goes to actual families and programming that sustains the community. So I say all that to say, our role in it over the next, and always has been to a certain degree, because the communities all usually last. It's really building parental capacity and community capacity to identify and advocate for their priorities. There are, yes, there's never enough resources for everything, but there's more resources than, we have more than what we think a lot of times. And so really empowering the families and community, take it to that next level and say, this is important enough to us. And we know that prevention is always less expensive than juvenile. I think I saw some statistics that to incarcerate a child for a year, or even, you know, it could be anywhere from $100,000 to $185,000, like $600 a day. So you can't tell me that there are not enough resources to invest in supporting families by just reducing the numbers, and that doesn't pay for itself. So that's going to be our work over the next year, because we've worked for so many years to make it a cost-effective program. Now it's up to the parents and the community to say that it's important to us, and that it invests in value over cheap or over price. So that's what we will be doing over the next couple years.
Tracy, you posted something on social media that I'm like, getting creative. You had your mother queen, amazing mom, facilitating a cooking demonstration with kids virtually. And I'm like, that's when we say my family's involved, my blood, my chosen family's involved in my work. If it's good enough for your family, it's good enough for the families that you serve.
Most definitely. And you know, we do so much that you forget, but
I don't forget.
Right, we are piloting this summer a virtual skills camp And that would be something that we need to explore for our older kids. We started with K through 4, but I teach music lessons. We're doing drama and monologue development. On Wednesdays, we do sound meditation, trauma release therapy. Thursdays, we do dance, and Fridays, we do cooking. So yes, so hopefully, thank you. I forgot, Miss Jeanette. So,
those are the creative, innovative things that you're doing in your community as a preventive for young people and as an extension to some pro-social programming for kids.
Absolutely, and we can certainly
amazing work.
And with the virtual, and with COVID-19 and the virtual work and what we've invested in equipment, that's something we certainly can expand to our older youth and give them an opportunity to invest in themselves and feel like they can do something that matters.
Yeah. So I know we're almost out of time, and luckily, because you guys are just so great at wrapping so much and packing so much information into the answer to each question, we've covered pretty much close to everything that people have asked. At least touched on everything, with one exception. And so as we kind of start to wind down here, I'd like both of you, Kate and Tracy, to think about this question, is that sometimes families are genuinely confused about what is the role of probation? What can I expect you to do? What should I expect you to do? You know, what is your role in my life and my child's life? What can you expect of me? What rights do I have? All of that. So especially as you both talk about doing these new and creative and innovative things, how do you help families understand that role, the role of probation? And if you can each just take 1 minute to answer that, because we're really getting out of time here. But go ahead, Kate, and then we'll come back to Tracy.
So I think in the beginning, I'll always define it as, my number one job is to make sure that the youth is following the court order. Like, that's the traditional 10-second snapshot. Really, my job is to partner with you. I want you to feel empowered. I don't want you to feel like I've come in and taken over, because at some point probation is going to be gone, and you, mom and dad, or auntie and uncle, or grandma and grandpa, are still going to be here. And I want you to feel safe and comfortable and confident handling whatever your kid's going to bring to you really well when I'm gone. And so how can we do that? And then that's sort of how, and then we'll define the role from there. Someone had posted a really good question of not being, I don't want to be your 911 call, right? And so we plan around that in the beginning, not just because I'm not a crisis responder, but because parents need tools in their back pocket, not just probation, because we're going to be gone. And so that's how we try to frame it in the beginning of, let's do this now. Let's not wait till the end to figure out how you're going to live without probation as a support. Let's do it now and practice while we're on probation.
Great, thanks. And Tracy, if you could just chime in on that a little bit.
So we typically don't speak too much on the role of the different departments. We let the departments speak for themselves. We pretty much hone in our role. First, that we don't give legal advice. 2, we're here to put those supports around you so that you can comply with what the court order is. We're also there as a liaison if there's something in this order that you cannot comply with, so that you feel comfortable speaking for yourself or getting your needs met. For example, one was transportation, or parents that work swing shifts. And so there may be a new date set up. And how do you say to the judge, hey, judge, that doesn't work for me, though? What parent is going to feel comfortable saying that? So we're able to be that bridge, and we're able to say that. And then eventually, again, it's always a continuum. We'll start off speaking most up front to make you feel comfortable, but eventually the role is for you to speak for yourself.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. Jeanette and I and Kate and Tracy could go on. We are so passionate about this, but it's time to turn it back to Shavante.
Hi, yes, this was so amazing. I just want to thank all of our panelists and our moderators who did an excellent job of getting so much information out to everyone. I just want to remind folks that this webinar recording will be posted over on JDAI Connect within the next day. So if there are things that you wanted to get from the panelists, if there were questions you wanted to follow up on, you can find it over there. With the recording, I will post the information of the panelists just in case you want to follow up and ask them any additional questions. But we really do thank Kate, Tracy, Jeanette, and Sue for this amazing webinar. You gave so much really important information. We've been talking about how COVID has really changed a lot of the work we're doing, and hopefully we can sustain some of these really great family-centered, youth-centered models as we go forward. So again, if you want to see the webinar recording, please head over to JDI Connect within the next day or so to find it. If you have any questions following this, please feel free to email jdaiconnect@pretrial.org, and I'll be there to answer any questions. Again, thank you to our panelists and our moderators, and everyone have a great and wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.